This program is brought to you by Ignite TV. Now you're in command. Visit Rogers.com for more details.
Welcome to Our Story, Stories That Unite Us. A show that celebrates the stories we all have about those experiences, large or small, simple or complex, happy or sad, that give shape to our lives. Today, I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we're on the territory of the people of the Three Fires Confederacy, the Ojibwe, the Odawa, and the Potawatomi nations. And we further give thanks to the Chippewas of Saugeen and the Chippewas of Nawash, now collectively known as the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, as the traditional keepers of this land. Our first guest today is Jill Umbach. Jill is the coordinator of the Bruce Grey Poverty Task Force and the Grey Bruce Children's Alliance. Jill has over 40 years' experience working with local, national, and international humanitarian aid agencies, having been on the field in more than 12 countries. Today, she shares with us a story of persistence. Welcome, Jill.
Thank you. So my story is full of gratitude, persistence, and just a little bit about how it takes a lot of effort, a lot of community, and a lot of people to build a family. My own family, I grew up with adoptive brothers and sisters and foster brothers and sisters. I grew up in a large family in Hanover, and my parents adopted 4 brothers and sisters, and also had 15 foster kids living in our house. So when it began time to build my own family, I thought I would do so through adoption. At the time, I was living in East Timor, though. East Timor is north of Australia. It was a country that, at the time when I was there, that was just coming out of independence. There was a lot of conflict happening. And when I began my journey, I actually thought, this is the right time to do it, not because I was in a country of conflict, but one which I thought was going to be more stable, and I thought it was a wonderful place to start growing my family. I did soon learn that in East Timor, you couldn't adopt as a single parent. You had to be married, and this was part of my journey, was to find another route to find my family. It took me 3 years to finally bring my daughter back to Canada. And part of that journey started off in East Timor, where I discovered I had to do a third country adoption. A third country adoption is when you are a Canadian and you want to adopt from another country, and yet you are working and living in a third country. So there I was in East Timor, and I was lucky and fortunate enough to find 2 Canadian adoption agencies that would work with me to adopt from Nepal. My story should have been fairly straightforward, but it wasn't. Challenges existed with moving back and forth between Canada and East Timor. And then finally I went to Nepal anticipating that I would take maternity leave, bring home my daughter, and then return to my job at East Timor. That didn't happen. As it was, and as it does happen in the world of adoption, you are subject to the laws of various lands, and you are subject to what happens in life. More conflict broke out in East Timor, and so I was struggling between working as a country director for Care International and also trying to ensure that I could adopt my daughter. My first adoption, though, match fell through due to some bureaucracy and some paperwork, and in fact the first child I was matched with to adopt from Nepal, turns out the parents during the conflict in Nepal had put their child in an orphanage, but they hadn't anticipated the child would be adopted. And this is part of the landscape of international adoption. So when I was matched with this young boy, it turns out his parents had been brought to the orphanage to be raised there, but his parents had actually had an uncle take them and say the parents were dead. And you know, at a time in conflict, they were looking for food, education, and a safe place for their child in Nepal to grow up. They didn't anticipate or want to have their child adopted. So the parents were declared dead. And then through a lot more investigations, we found out, in fact, that the parents were alive, very much alive. And so that young boy did grow up in the orphanage, and I was lucky because I used to work there, so I was able to check on him. But obviously he wasn't going to be coming to my home. I had a second match with another child, and so things were moving along smoothly. I saw photos of a big, fat, healthy, beautiful girl, and so my first trip over to Nepal to sign the first paperwork indicated, you know, all things were good. When I arrived, I saw a skinny, unhealthy, very sick baby who I immediately took to hospital that day. So the first meeting was, we called her my not so happy baby. All the photos we'd been given was of a fat, chubby baby, and what I actually saw was a very, very sick child. So fortunately for me, I had lived in Nepal for 7 years. I spoke the language, I knew the doctors at the hospital, and I immediately said to the local staff, hop in a taxi, we're going to the hospital. So that was the first day of meeting my daughter, which should have been one of those joyous, here's this beautiful baby. And we spent the next week trying to get her to recover. Turns out she's allergic to everything. And so these are some of the things that in a country where it's fairly low income and there's a large amount of poverty, she was allergic to environmental allergies and allergic to everything. A little bit embarrassing for her, but solvable. The next couple of weeks really had me staying in the country longer than I anticipated. I had taken 2 weeks from my job, and I ended up having to set up a new nanny and a whole bunch of other health care for this child, so that she would thrive. So she was declared failing to thrive. So that was my first shock, and that was my first step into parenthood. I then hired people to take care of her a little bit better, put a little bit more money into it, spent more time, had family friends visiting her. Because I had lived in Nepal for 7 years, I had the connections. When I came back to sign the final paperwork and bring my daughter home, 1 week prior to flying home with her, back to East Timor is what I thought, where I was working and where my job was, we learned that the government shut down all international adoption. So I found myself in a hotel room with a baby and no means to bring her home. So I was not alone. There was about 30 of us that ended up staying in country and living in Nepal for the rest of the year with our children because they had already come to us to take home. The government at the time, we had to lobby them. Unfortunately, we all had some political connections and you know, we came up against a lot of adversity. So it took me almost 3 years to bring my daughter home, and we were able to come back to Canada. We were challenged, but we are here now. Some of the challenges, you know, international adoption has, there was some mistakes on our paperwork. So I do have a shout out for Larry Miller at the time. His office came through for us. And I'm very grateful that they were, after 2 years, able to make a correction on my daughter's paperwork so I could actually get her legal name here in Canada. But it was a long journey. There was a lot of people that helped to create our family, and we have made our home here in Owen Sound. So my child doesn't know all the paperwork and bureaucracy, but sometimes you get by friends and family who will go that extra mile for you and help you with all the paperwork for that. There's over 30,000 children here in Canada that are in the foster care system and need to be adopted. About 2,000 a year get adopted. So building your family through adoption, it's incredibly hard, challenging, but the most rewarding thing you can do, and one of the most rewarding ways to build your family.
Thank you very much, Jill. And we appreciate you coming here and telling us this wonderful story.
Thanks.
Our guest today is Cathy Lee. A recently retired Nunavut educator and educational leader who took up painting after a near-fatal accident in some hurricane-forced winds in Pangnirtung, Nunavut. And she brings to us a story about gratitude. Cathy?
Thank you so much. Lovely to meet you.
Hi.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you, folks, for welcoming here. I'm grateful to be able to come back. And as we've already said, my name is Cathy Lee. I was gifted a name in Inuktitut, the language of Inuit, which is Makolia Minelikuluk, which means the dear mother of the twins. I have twin daughters, Kira and Caitlin Lee Kunilusi, proud mama bear, and had spent 32 years in Inuit community on Baffin Island. So I want to share about gratitude. As folks have shared, I had a near-death experience when my shed collapsed on top of me in some hurricane-force winds in Pangnirtung and was trapped underneath it. I knew no one was coming. Came to and realized had some significant damage to my arm. It was blowing in the wind. That doesn't look right. So was able, my leg was pinned underneath, pulled my leg out, my boot came off, my sock came off, and was able to lift the debris enough to get myself out and get to our health center. So that experience, I was in the Ottawa Rehabilitation Centre, going back and forth for arm rehabilitation, and we later learned that I had developed a chronic pain condition called CRPS, complex regional pain, as well as PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And we didn't know at the time that I had the pain condition, and the surgeon couldn't understand why I was not healing as quickly and why I kept having to go back to emergency because we could not manage the pain. And I would meet with him weekly. They'd go in and do the x-rays, and he said, "Cathy, you need to move that arm, you need to move that hand." So I took up painting. And the painting was life-saving, it's life-giving, and it's morphed into a retirement project, I guess we would call it, where I paint, and I work with a company to put my images on wearable art. And I also developed a process of expressing gratitude daily and living with a mindset of being grateful. So I have some mantras that I say in the morning. I do a morning walk. I head to Georgian Bay. I live at Mallory Beach, north of Wyerton, and I walk to what we call the S Bend and just go down to the water and be very grateful for being surrounded by the land on which we live and the water that surrounds us. And it has taught me out of, I guess people have said, out of the ashes of that potential death came this practice of living each day with gratitude and being grateful for all I am and all I have, and I'm becoming more confident in sharing that story with others, because others have said to me when I have shared my story how meaningful it has been to them and how it has inspired them to also, I think in everything that goes on around us in this world, it's easy to delve into a place of despair or just seeing life as challenges. And I think when we flip that narrative and flip that paradigm, that mindset, and start from a place of being grateful and having gratitude, it completely changes one's outlook and one's life. So that's my story that I wanted to share.
Thank you very much, Cathy, for sharing us that story.
Thanks so much.
Really appreciate
it.
And now, our next guest is none other than myself. And I'll also be sharing a story of gratitude, describing a bit my trajectory as how I got into this town and what I've been doing here. So, you'd never know it from the past that I had that I'd eventually wind up doing what I'm doing, and that is acting as an artist, sort of like a jack of all trades culturally. I am a poet, a performer, I'm a visual artist, I'm a songwriter, and I had a chance to do all these wonderful things only since I arrived in Owen Sound. This is the town that gave me everything that I have today. When I got here in 2010, I was homeless. I was not living on the street, but I did not actually have a place, and it took some rather complicated machinations to eventually get me into an apartment, which I was very grateful to have. And it gave me the first sense of solidity that I had in quite a long time, because I'd spent the previous 2 years to that in Southampton, living in a rooming house above a hotel, above a tavern. So that those weren't basically the best or the healthiest accommodations for somebody who had a few challenges against him. My mental health has always been precarious, and we were always looking for a way to stabilize it, and medication never seemed to do it. Therapy never really seemed to do a good job of it. But eventually, what became my solution was community. When I first arrived here, I had aspirations of becoming a writer. As a kid, I thought I was going to be the great Canadian novelist. That never transpired, so I went off to university and I did a whole bunch of academic stuff, and I wound up as an instructor at Queen's for a little while, started a PhD at the University of Toronto, and like many University of Toronto PhD students, I burned out. Then I thought, well, maybe I'd become a teacher. And that didn't work out so well because I realized that I have absolutely no classroom management skills. And these are things that you can't really learn. Nobody teaches you classroom management. You either have that ability or you don't, and I certainly didn't. So I wound up pretty darn unemployed, depressed, and unemployable. My behavior became quite chaotic as I sank very deeply into a depression. And I'm not ashamed to describe that I've got bipolar 2. And that was always quite debilitating. When I arrived in Owen Sound, though, after basically fleeing Southampton, I found stability. I found stability in a town that was accepting and welcoming and gave opportunities for a wannabe artist. And so I first started attending a series of coffee houses. First off, at the behind the bookstore, which later became the Bleeding Carrot, and that is, well, now they're waiting to open something from Caseros. They're going to put that in there, and so that was the bookstore that was run by Hazel Leiter, and of course the series. The legendary Sounds series, the Coffee House series, it was run by Bob Menzies and Caroline Menzies. And that was fantastic because I found a community of fellow misfits, of people with artistic pretensions and an interest in cultural activities and affairs, and it allowed me to blossom little by little. I started adding my own poems to theirs. So I started showing up for the open mic portion, doing my own things, and they started getting fairly well, there was a good response to them. And so I just kept on going, and I started developing it more and more. The next major sort of milestone was when I came up with the idea of writing a book about Owen Sound's history, but in poetic form. And that later became Brownfields, which Mary Ann Thomas commissioned from me in 2014. So I'd barely been in town for 4 years, and I started reading all these wonderful Andrew Armitage articles and Richard Thomas books about the history of Owen Sound, consulting the archives, basically the on microform and microfiche, the old Sun Times articles and things like that. And so I came up with a book that describes the history of Owen Sound. It's got Captain Owen in it. It's got Sky Woman. So it starts off right there from the very, very beginnings of in sort of geologic time, and it goes right on up through to our sort of late 20th century, early 21st century confusion, things like that. And it became sort of like a tribute to my town. And then it just kind of accelerated after that. I wrote another book for Mary Ann called Down Market Oldies FM Station Blues, which is more personal poetry, and these were pieces that I'd performed in town and outside of it as well. And then when the opportunity to become Poet Laureate came up, well, then I jumped onto that. Now, I'd already applied for Poet Laureate about 3-4 times in the past, and I never got it. And I was always grateful to see people whom I respected get the job, but I always figured that one day it was going to happen to me. And so it did in 2019. I finally got the job as Poet Laureate. And I thought, that's it, I'm going to have fun with this. So one of the things that I did was I created an augmented reality poetry collection, which features the amazing computer work, the high-tech work of Will McReynolds at KP9 Interactive. And so we created what is in fact the very first trade poetry publication in this country that features augmented reality. And I've been trying to get this publicized, and the CBC's never been interested in it, and it's driving me crazy because I really, really want to get this out there. There are very, very few and far between augmented reality books. So this is one of the few that are there. And then I also decided that as my term was coming to an end, that I decided I'd do something very special. So I put on a 1-hour stage show based on the experiences that I had when I first arrived in Owen Sound. And it features my own songs played by Dave Hawkins and the Assembled Angels Choir. And it features my own paintings in it. And that played to 2 sold-out houses at the Grey Roots Auditorium just this past June. Took it on the road, brought it to fringe festivals in London and in Kingston, and had a great time with that. And those were the culminating projects. And I think they're basically the culminating activities of myself as an artist in this town. What next? I don't know. You tell me. Thank you very much.
This Boiler Beach performance was brought to you by 2M Power and the Bruce Kincardine.
I wanna hear you scream. I'm a misfit.
Connect with us by visiting our website or email us at comments@rogerstv.com.
Tune in next week on Grey County Life. We'll be chatting with Marcia Cunningham from the Roxy Theatre, along with some of the cast from the Ladies Foursome.
We'll also talk to Janet Juniper about the upcoming Bayshore Bridal Show. Hope you'll join us.
Coming for you.